The bright morning sun shone down on the busy streets of London as a massive gold-colored Rolls-Royce pulled up to the famous Buckingham Palace. The car was so shiny that it almost hurt to look at it directly. People walking nearby stopped and stared because they had never seen such an expensive-looking vehicle in their entire lives. The driver quickly jumped out and ran to open the back door. Out stepped a man who looked like he owned the entire world. This was Marcus Wellington III, and he was one of the richest people on the planet. His suit probably cost more money than most families make in a whole year. His shoes were made from the finest leather, and his watch sparkled with diamonds that caught the sunlight. Marcus was 50 years old, but he acted like a spoiled child who always got everything he wanted. His gray hair was perfectly styled, and his face showed no kindness at all. He had cold blue eyes that looked at other people like they were insects. When he walked, he held his head high and his nose pointed up in the air, as if he smelled something terrible. Behind him came 6 people who worked for him. These were his personal assistants and bodyguards who followed him everywhere he went. They all wore black suits and dark sunglasses, even though it was not that sunny outside. They carried his bags and phones, and made sure nobody got too close to their boss. Marcus had flown all the way from America to London just to show off his wealth. He did not care about seeing the beautiful palace or learning about history. He only wanted to take pictures that would make other rich people jealous when he posted them on social media. He had already planned exactly how he would pose and what he would say to make himself look even more important. As soon as his expensive shoes touched the sidewalk, Marcus started complaining loudly. He pointed at the crowds of normal tourists and said they were ruining his perfect day. He told his assistants to clear a path for him because he did not want to walk near poor people. His voice was loud and rude, and many people turned to look at him with shocked faces. A young mother was trying to take a photo of her children in front of the palace gates. Marcus walked right in front of her camera and completely blocked her shot. When she politely asked him to move, he gave her such a mean look that she quickly grabbed her kids and walked away. He did not care that he had ruined a family memory that could never be replaced. Marcus had made his fortune by creating computer software, but he had done it in ways that hurt other people. He had stolen ideas from smaller companies and refused to pay workers what they deserved. He had lied to investors and cheated on his taxes. But because he was so rich, he never got in trouble for any of these bad things. Every day of his life, people told Marcus how wonderful he was because they wanted his money. Hotel managers gave him the best rooms for free. Restaurant owners served him meals that were not even on the menu. Shop owners let him cut in line ahead of everyone else. Nobody had ever said no to Marcus Wellington III, and he expected today to be exactly the same. He looked up at the tall palace walls and the red uniformed guards standing perfectly still at their posts. To Marcus, these soldiers were just decorations like statues in a museum. He did not know or care that they were real people with families and feelings. He saw them as props for his expensive photo shoot and nothing more. The stage was set for something terrible to happen, and Marcus had no idea that his entire life was about to change forever. Marcus walked straight toward the famous Red Guards, who stood perfectly still in front of Buckingham Palace. These guards were known all around the world for their tall black hats and bright red uniforms. They carried rifles and stood like statues no matter what happened around them. Tourists came from every country just to see them and try to make them smile or move. But Marcus did not care about tradition or respect. He saw the guards as his personal servants who should do whatever he told them to do. He marched right up to the closest guard and started yelling orders like he was the boss of the entire palace. The guard he approached was named James Morrison. James was 28 years old and had served his country with honor for many years. He had been a soldier in Afghanistan, where he had seen terrible things and saved the lives of his fellow soldiers. He had medals for bravery hidden under his red uniform. James had joined the palace guard because he wanted to continue serving his country in a peaceful way. James stood perfectly straight with his rifle held tight against his body. His face showed no emotion at all because that was his job. No matter what tourists did or said, he had to remain completely still like a statue. This took incredible strength and discipline that most people could never understand. Marcus pointed his finger right at James' face and shouted loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Move to the left right now," he demanded. "I need you over there for my photograph. You work for me today, so do what I tell you to do." His voice was filled with anger, and his face was turning red because he expected instant obedience. James did not move even one tiny bit. His eyes looked straight ahead, and his breathing stayed calm and steady. He had been trained to ignore all distractions, no matter how rude or loud they became. The training was so hard that many soldiers could not complete it. Only the very best and strongest men could become palace guards. This made Marcus even more angry than before. He was not used to being ignored by anyone, especially someone he thought was just a regular worker. In his mind, these guards were no different from waiters or taxi drivers who should jump to serve him immediately. He had never met a person who would not bow down to his money and power. Marcus started walking in circles around James while shouting even louder. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed. "I am worth more money than this entire palace. I could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. You will do what I say or I will have you fired from this stupid job." Other tourists began to notice the commotion and started gathering around to watch. Some of them pulled out their phones and began recording videos of the angry rich man yelling at the silent soldier. Children hid behind their parents because Marcus' voice was so scary and mean. An old couple from Japan shook their heads in disgust at his terrible behavior. James continued to stand perfectly still even though sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. Inside his mind, he was thinking about his training and his duty to his country. He remembered his commanding officer telling him that being a palace guard meant representing the best of British values, no matter what happened. Marcus' face grew even redder as his frustration reached a boiling point. He had never been so insulted in his entire life. The crowd of watching tourists made him feel embarrassed and angry at the same time. Something terrible was building up inside him, and everyone could feel that the situation was about to explode into something much worse. Marcus Wellington had reached his breaking point. His face was bright red with anger, and his hands were shaking with rage. He had never in his entire life met someone who refused to obey his commands. The fact that this simple soldier was ignoring him made him feel like his head might explode from fury. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, and now more than 50 people were watching the terrible scene unfold. Phone cameras were pointed at Marcus from every direction, recording his shameful behavior. Children were crying because his shouting was so loud and frightening. Their parents held them close and whispered that everything would be okay. Marcus stepped even closer to James Morrison until he was only inches away from the guard's face. James could feel the angry man's hot breath, but he did not move backward or show any fear. His military training had taught him to stay calm even when facing the worst dangers imaginable. "You think you are better than me?" Marcus screamed so loudly that people 3 blocks away could hear him. His spit flew from his mouth as he yelled, and his eyes looked completely crazy. "I have more power in my little finger than you will ever have in your entire pathetic life. I own people like you." James' eyes remained focused straight ahead, looking at nothing and everything at the same time. Inside his mind, he was reciting the oath he had taken when he became a palace guard. He promised to serve with honor and dignity no matter what challenges he faced. This was the biggest test of his career, and he was determined not to fail. The crowd began to murmur among themselves about how disgraceful Marcus' behavior was becoming. An elderly British woman with gray hair and a walking stick pushed her way to the front. She had lived through World War II and had never seen such disrespect shown to a soldier. Her face showed pure disgust as she watched Marcus lose control of himself completely. Then something happened that nobody could have imagined even in their worst nightmares. Marcus completely lost his mind with rage and did something that shocked every single person watching. He leaned forward and spat directly into James Morrison's face. The thick, disgusting saliva hit the young soldier right on his left cheek, and began to drip down slowly. The entire crowd went completely silent for several seconds. It was like time had stopped moving, and everyone forgot how to breathe. Even the birds seemed to stop singing and the traffic noise faded away. The only sound was the disgusting spit dripping from James' face onto his perfect red uniform. Then the silence exploded into gasps and screams of horror. People could not believe what they had just witnessed. A woman from France started crying and covered her face with her hands. A group of American tourists began shouting that they were ashamed someone like Marcus might be from their country. James Morrison felt the warm spit on his skin, but his face showed no emotion at all. His jaw muscles tightened just slightly, but that was the only sign that anything had happened. Years of military discipline had prepared him for moments like this, even though nothing could have prepared him for such complete disrespect. Marcus stood there with a satisfied smile on his face, thinking he had finally won the battle. He believed he had shown everyone who was really in charge. But he had no idea that his moment of cruel victory would soon become the worst mistake of his entire life. The cameras had captured everything, and the world was about to see what kind of monster he really was. The moment Marcus' spit hit James Morrison's face, the crowd of tourists exploded into the loudest angry voices anyone had ever heard outside Buckingham Palace. What had started as shocked silence quickly turned into pure rage from dozens of people who could not believe what they had just witnessed. The elderly British woman with the walking stick was the first to speak up. Her voice shook with anger as she pointed her finger at Marcus and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are an absolute disgrace to humanity," she yelled. "How dare you treat our brave soldier this way? You should be ashamed of yourself, you horrible man." A family from Australia joined her in condemning Marcus' terrible behavior. The father stepped forward with his wife and 2 young children behind him. "This is the most disgusting thing I have ever seen in my life," he said with his voice full of disgust. "That soldier serves his country with honor, and you treat him like garbage. You make me sick to my stomach." More and more people began speaking up against Marcus as their shock turned into pure anger. A group of college students from Germany started chanting "Shame on you" over and over again. Their voices grew louder and stronger as other tourists joined in with the chanting. The sound echoed off the palace walls and could be heard from far away. An American woman who had been visiting London with her teenage daughter was so embarrassed she started crying. "Please do not think all Americans are like this terrible man," she said to anyone who would listen. "We are good people, and we respect your soldiers and your country. This man does not represent us at all." The phones and cameras that had been recording Marcus' rude behavior were now capturing something much more important. They were showing how ordinary people from all around the world could come together to stand up against bullying and cruelty. The videos were already being uploaded to social media sites where millions of people would soon see them. A young boy who was maybe 8 years old tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked in a loud voice why the mean man was being so awful to the nice soldier. His innocent question made several adults in the crowd start crying, because children should never have to see such cruelty and hatred. Marcus began to realize that something had gone terribly wrong with his plan. He had expected people to be impressed by his power and wealth. Instead, they were all looking at him like he was some kind of monster. The satisfied smile disappeared from his face and was replaced by confusion and the first tiny bit of fear. His bodyguards and assistants, who usually protected him from any problems, were standing frozen like statues. They had never seen their boss do something so completely insane before. Even they looked shocked and disgusted by what had just happened. Some of them were quietly stepping away from Marcus as if they did not want to be associated with him anymore. The crowd continued to grow larger as word spread quickly through the area that something terrible was happening at the palace. People came running from nearby streets to see what all the shouting was about. Tour buses stopped and emptied their passengers, who joined the angry crowd surrounding Marcus. A teenage girl from Canada was live streaming the entire event on her phone. Thousands of people were watching in real time and leaving comments expressing their horror and anger. The viewer count kept climbing higher and higher as people shared the stream with their friends and family members. James Morrison still stood perfectly still with the disgusting spit slowly drying on his face. But now the crowd was cheering for him and showing him the respect and support he deserved. People were calling him a hero and thanking him for his service to his country. Their love and admiration for the brave soldier was as strong as their hatred for the cruel rich man who had attacked him. Marcus was beginning to understand that he had made the biggest mistake of his entire life, but it was already far too late to take it back. In the middle of all the shouting and chaos, James Morrison did something that showed the entire world what real strength and honor looked like. Very slowly and with perfect control, he reached up with his white-gloved hand and wiped the disgusting spit from his face. He did not make any angry faces or say mean words back to Marcus. He simply cleaned himself with dignity. The crowd watched in complete amazement as James performed this simple act with such grace and class. Here was a man who had every right to be angry and fight back, but instead he chose to show mercy and self-control. His calm response spoke louder than any words could have about the difference between a true gentleman and a spoiled bully. James never broke eye contact with Marcus during the entire time he was wiping his face clean. His steady gaze was not angry or threatening, but it was firm and strong. It was the look of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. Marcus felt smaller and smaller under that powerful stare. The other palace guards who were stationed nearby had seen everything that happened to their fellow soldier. Even though they had to stay at their posts and could not move to help him, they found small ways to show their support. One guard gave James a tiny nod that only he could see. Another guard straightened his shoulders just a little bit more to show he was proud of his colleague. These soldiers had trained together and served together for years. They were like brothers who would always stand up for each other, no matter what happened. They knew that James was handling the situation exactly the right way, and they respected him even more for his incredible self-control. The crowd began to understand that they were watching something truly special happen. This was not just about one rude tourist and one patient guard. This was about the difference between people who had character and people who did not. James Morrison was showing everyone what it meant to be a real man in the face of cruelty. An old man who had served in the military many years ago pushed through the crowd to get closer to James. With tears in his eyes, he saluted the young guard and said, "Thank you for showing us how a soldier should behave. You make your country proud, young man." Other veterans in the crowd joined him in saluting James with respect and admiration. People began to clap and cheer for James Morrison. The sound started small with just a few people, but quickly grew into thunderous applause that echoed off the palace walls. Children were clapping and jumping up and down with excitement. Adults were wiping tears from their eyes as they showed their appreciation for the brave soldier. The cheering grew louder and louder until it sounded like a football stadium full of fans celebrating their favorite team. But this was different because these people were celebrating something much more important than a game. They were celebrating courage and dignity and honor in the face of evil. James felt the love and support flowing toward him from hundreds of strangers, but his expression never changed. He continued to stand at attention, doing his job exactly as he had been trained to do. Inside his heart, he felt proud and grateful, but outside, he remained the perfect professional soldier. Marcus stood in the middle of all this celebration, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his entire life. The crowd that had been angry with him before was now completely ignoring him. They were focused on the real hero of the story, and Marcus had become invisible and unimportant. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington III realized that money and power meant nothing when compared to basic human decency. James Morrison owned almost nothing, but he was richer in character than Marcus could ever hope to be. The guard had won this battle without throwing a single punch or saying a single word. While the crowd was still cheering for James Morrison, something incredible was happening in the digital world that would change everything forever. The dozens of phones that had recorded Marcus' disgusting act were already uploading the videos to every social media platform on Earth. The internet was about to deliver justice in a way that no court or police force ever could. Within the first 5 minutes, the videos had been shared over 1,000 times on different social media sites. People were watching the footage with their mouths hanging open in shock and disbelief. They could not believe that any human being could be so cruel and disrespectful to a soldier who was just doing his job. A hashtag called Royal Guard Respect began trending on social media sites around the world. Millions of people were using this hashtag to share the videos and express their anger about what Marcus had done. The hashtag spread faster than wildfire, jumping from country to country as people woke up and saw the incredible footage. The videos were being shared in dozens of different languages as people translated the story for their friends and family members. People in Japan were sharing it during their morning coffee. People in Brazil were watching it during their lunch breaks. People in Australia were seeing it before they went to bed. The sun never set on the anger and disgust that people felt toward Marcus Wellington. Major news networks began picking up the story and broadcasting the videos on television shows watched by millions of viewers. News reporters were calling it one of the most shocking displays of disrespect they had ever seen. They interviewed military experts who explained how incredibly difficult it was for James to maintain his composure under such terrible treatment. Marcus' business partners started receiving thousands of angry emails and phone calls from people demanding that they cut all ties with him immediately. His company headquarters was flooded with so many calls that their phone system crashed completely. Protesters began gathering outside his office buildings, carrying signs that called him a disgrace and a bully. The stock price of Marcus companies began falling like a rock thrown off a cliff. Investors were selling their shares as fast as they could because they did not want to be associated with such a hated man. In just 1 hour, he lost over $50 million as his business empire started crumbling around him. Celebrity actors and famous musicians began posting messages on their social media accounts condemning Marcus' behavior. They encouraged their millions of followers to boycott his companies and never buy his products again. Some celebrities offered to donate money to military charities in honor of James Morrison. Political leaders from around the world also spoke out against Marcus' actions. The Prime Minister of Britain called his behavior absolutely unacceptable and promised that there would be serious consequences. The President of France said that such cruelty had no place in civilized society. Even leaders who usually never agreed on anything were united in their disgust. Online forums and discussion groups were filled with people sharing their own stories about military family members and friends. Veterans wrote emotional posts about how much James Morrison's dignity meant to them. They said he represented the best values of military service and made them proud to have worn the uniform. People began creating artwork and poems inspired by James Morrison and his incredible self-control. Artists drew pictures of him standing strong and proud, while Marcus looked small and pathetic beside him. The Guard was becoming a symbol of everything good about humanity, while Marcus represented everything bad. Marcus tried to get his expensive public relations team to control the damage, but it was already too late. The internet had made its judgment, and there was no appeal process. His name was now permanently connected to shame and cruelty. Every time someone searched for his name online, they would see the videos of his worst moment forever. The digital revolution of anger was just beginning, and Marcus had no idea how much worse things were about to become for him. Less than 2 hours after Marcus had committed his terrible act against James Morrison, the sound of police sirens could be heard approaching Buckingham Palace. The British authorities had been watching the viral videos just like everyone else in the world, and they were not going to let this crime go unpunished, no matter how rich or powerful the criminal thought he was. 6 police officers arrived at the scene and immediately began questioning the witnesses who had seen everything happen. Dozens of tourists eagerly stepped forward to give their statements and show the clear video evidence they had recorded on their phones. There was so much proof of Marcus' guilt that the case was already solved before it even began. Marcus tried to use his wealth and influence to make the problem disappear, just like he had done so many times before in his life. He offered to pay money to the police and suggested that they forget the whole thing ever happened. But the British legal system was not for sale, and his attempts to buy his way out of trouble only made the officers more determined to see justice done. The lead detective explained to Marcus that he was being arrested for assault against a member of the British Armed Forces. He was also being charged with public disorder and disturbing the peace. In Britain, these were serious crimes that could result in jail time and heavy fines, even for billionaires who thought they were above the law. Marcus' expensive team of lawyers flew to London on private jets to try to save their client from the consequences of his actions. These lawyers had helped him escape punishment for many bad things he had done in business over the years. But this time was different because the evidence was so clear and the public anger was so strong. The British government was deeply embarrassed that such a terrible incident had happened at one of their most important national symbols. Government officials held emergency meetings to discuss how to respond to the international outrage. They decided that Marcus had to face the full power of British justice to show the world that such behavior would never be tolerated. The judge who was assigned to Marcus' case was known for being tough on people who showed disrespect to military personnel. She had served in the military herself before becoming a lawyer, and she took crimes against soldiers very personally. Marcus' lawyers knew they were in serious trouble when they learned who would be deciding their client's fate. During the court hearings, the videos of Marcus spitting on James Morrison were played over and over again for the judge and jury to see. Each time the footage was shown, people in the courtroom gasped with shock and disgust. There was no way to deny what had happened or make excuses for such terrible behavior. The British government also decided to revoke Marcus' visa and ban him from ever entering the United Kingdom again for the rest of his life. This meant he could never come back to London or any other part of Britain, no matter how much money he had or how many lawyers he hired. He was being exiled from an entire country because of his cruelty. Several other countries around the world began reviewing their own relationships with Marcus and his businesses. Some nations canceled honorary citizenship awards they had given him years earlier. Others banned his companies from doing business within their borders. The global community was united in rejecting everything Marcus represented. The financial penalties were enormous even for someone as wealthy as Marcus. He was ordered to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and court costs. His legal bills alone were costing him millions of dollars as his army of lawyers worked around the clock to minimize the damage to his reputation and fortune. But the worst punishment was not the money or the legal consequences. It was the complete destruction of his public image and business empire. Companies that had been eager to work with him before now refused to return his phone calls. Business deals worth billions of dollars were canceled overnight as partners fled from his toxic brand. Marcus had always believed that money could solve any problem and buy his way out of any trouble. He was learning the hard way that there were some things in life that no amount of wealth could fix. His moment of cruel stupidity was going to cost him everything he had worked his entire life to build. The wheels of justice were turning, and Marcus Wellington, the third, was about to discover that actions have consequences even for billionaires who think they own the world. While Marcus Wellington was facing the destruction of his entire life, James Morrison was experiencing something completely different. The brave soldier who had shown such incredible dignity was being recognized and honored by people all around the world. His moment of perfect self-control had turned him into an international symbol of courage and character. The first sign that James' life was about to change came when a representative from Buckingham Palace called him into a private meeting. He was told that Queen Elizabeth herself had personally watched the videos of the incident and was deeply impressed by his professional behavior under such terrible circumstances. The Queen wanted to meet with James personally to thank him for representing the best values of British military service. 3 days after the incident, James found himself standing in one of the most beautiful rooms inside Buckingham Palace wearing his finest dress uniform. The Queen entered the room with a warm smile and spent 30 minutes talking with him about his military service and his incredible display of restraint. She presented him with a special medal for outstanding conduct that very few soldiers ever receive. The meeting with the Queen was kept private out of respect for James' humble personality, but word of the honor spread quickly through military circles. His fellow soldiers and officers were incredibly proud that one of their own had been recognized by the highest authority in the land. James became a hero among his colleagues who understood better than anyone how difficult his situation had been. Letters and packages began arriving at the palace from people all over the world who wanted to thank James for his inspiring example. Children sent him drawings of soldiers standing brave and strong. Veterans wrote emotional letters sharing their own stories of service and sacrifice. Families of military members expressed their gratitude for showing the world what their loved ones were truly like. A group of wealthy businessmen who were disgusted by Marcus' behavior decided to start a charity fund in James Morrison's name. The fund was designed to help military veterans who were struggling with problems after their service ended. Within 1 week, over $2 million had been donated by people who wanted to honor James in a meaningful way. James was overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness that was being shown to him. He had never expected that doing his job correctly would lead to such an incredible outpouring of support and love. But he remained as humble and modest as ever, refusing to take credit for simply behaving the way he had been trained to behave. Several major television networks offered James large amounts of money to appear on their shows and tell his story. Book publishers wanted to pay him millions of dollars to write about his military experiences and the incident with Marcus. Movie producers were interested in making films about his life and his moment of perfect courage. But James turned down most of these offers because he did not want to profit from doing what he considered to be his basic duty. Instead, he agreed to speak at military academies and training schools, where he could help teach young soldiers about maintaining discipline and honor under pressure. He wanted his experience to help make better soldiers, not to make himself rich or famous. The few interviews that James did agree to give showed the world what a genuinely good person he was. He spoke with intelligence and kindness about his military service and his love for his country. He never said anything bad about Marcus or expressed anger about what had happened to him. His forgiveness and grace impressed everyone who heard him speak. Universities began inviting James to speak to their students about leadership and character. Business schools wanted him to teach executives about real strength and self-control. His message was simple but powerful, that true strength comes from controlling yourself, not from controlling other people. The money that was raised in James' honor was donated to organizations that helped homeless veterans find housing and job training. James personally visited these programs to meet with veterans who were struggling and to let them know that their service was still valued and appreciated. He became a voice for forgotten soldiers who needed help and support. A small statue was erected outside the palace gates, showing James Morrison in his perfect military posture. The plaque at the base read, "He showed the world what honor looks like." Tourists from every country came to see the statue and take pictures with it. Many people left flowers and notes of thanks for the soldier who had inspired them to be better people. James Morrison had started that day as an unknown palace guard doing his quiet duty. He ended it as an international symbol of everything good about military service and human character. 1 year had passed since the terrible day when Marcus Wellington spat in the face of a British soldier and changed both of their lives forever. The world had moved on to other news stories, but the consequences of that single moment of cruelty continued to shape the futures of everyone involved in ways that nobody could have predicted. Marcus Wellington III had lost everything that really mattered in life. His business empire had collapsed completely as investors and partners fled from his toxic reputation. His personal fortune had shrunk from billions of dollars to barely enough to pay his legal bills and basic living expenses. The man who once owned private jets and golden cars now lived alone in a small apartment with no friends or family who wanted to see him. His wife had divorced him and taken half of his remaining money in the settlement. She told reporters that she could no longer live with a man who had shown such cruelty to an innocent person. His 3 children had legally changed their last names so they would not be associated with their father's shame for the rest of their lives. Marcus had become a cautionary tale that was taught in business schools around the world. Professors used his story to show students how quickly a lifetime of success could be destroyed by a single moment of terrible judgment. His name appeared in textbooks next to definitions of hubris and consequences of unchecked privilege. The few people who still remembered Marcus often wondered if he had learned anything from his experience. Some reports suggested that he had become a bitter and angry man who blamed everyone else for his problems. Others claimed he had found religion and was trying to make amends for his past behavior. But most people had simply forgotten about him completely. Meanwhile, James Morrison had continued his quiet service as a palace guard, but his life had been enriched in ways that money could never buy. The charity fund established in his name had grown to over $10 million and was helping thousands of military veterans across Britain find jobs, housing, and medical care they desperately needed. James had married his longtime girlfriend Sarah in a beautiful ceremony attended by his fellow soldiers and many of the people who had supported him during his difficult time. Their wedding photos showed two young people deeply in love, surrounded by friends who respected and admired them both. The couple had started a family, and James often told his young son bedtime stories about the importance of treating all people with kindness and respect. He wanted to make sure that the next generation would be better than the one that had produced Marcus Wellington and his terrible values. James had written a book about his military experiences that became a bestseller around the world. All of the profits from the book were donated to organizations that supported military families and veterans. He had become one of the most respected voices speaking about honor, duty, and service to others. Schools began teaching children about the James Morrison incident as an example of how to respond to bullying and cruelty with dignity and strength. His calm reaction had inspired millions of young people to choose patience and self-control over anger and violence when they faced their own difficult situations. The small statue outside Buckingham Palace had become one of the most photographed monuments in London. Tourists from every country came to see it and learn about the guard who had shown the world what real courage looked like. Many visitors left notes and flowers to honor his memory and example. Military academies around the world used video footage of James Morrison to teach new soldiers about maintaining discipline under pressure. His performance that day had become the gold standard for how professional military personnel should behave when facing provocation and disrespect. The incident had sparked important conversations about privilege, wealth, inequality, and the treatment of working people by those who considered themselves superior. Social movements had formed to promote respect for all workers regardless of their job or social status. Perhaps most importantly, the story had reminded people everywhere that character and integrity were more valuable than money and power. James Morrison owned very little in terms of material possessions, but he was richer in the things that truly mattered than Marcus Wellington could ever hope to be. The lasting impact of that single day outside Buckingham Palace would continue to inspire and teach people for generations to come. It had proven that one moment of perfect grace could triumph over a lifetime of cruelty and selfishness.